Hi, I'm Tyler Lyson. I'm in the Vertebrate Zoology Department, and I'm currently in my second year of a Peter Buck Postdoctoral Fellowship. And broadly, I'm interested in the interrelationship of amniotes as well as the origin of their body plans. Specifically, I'm interested in the origin of turtles and the origin of its body plan. Now, if we only consider living groups in an analysis published within the last 10 years, we can see that turtles have occupied every possible position on the amniote tree of life. Obviously, this is a problem, and lots of work needs to be done to resolve this issue. And I use a number of research tools to get at these very complicated problems. I conduct fieldwork in southwestern North Dakota and South Africa. I use computer tomography scans to visualize anatomy, including soft tissue anatomy. You can see in the lower left with the lungs. And then I integrate these data, the skeletal, the soft tissue, developmental, and molecular data, all within a tree-based or phylogenetic context in order to get at these complicated issues. So keep going here. So now while I'm interested in both of these questions, I'm only going to talk to you about the origin of the turtle body plan today, specifically the origin of the turtle shell. Now the turtle shell is this evolutionary novel structure that's made up of around 50 bones. And basically I'm interested in the timing and then the sequence of going from something like this lizard here on the left, this kind of represents the basal amniote body plan, and from which turtles evolved, to the highly modified body plan that we see here on the right, represented by the snapping turtle. And so there are two competing hypotheses for the origin of the main part of the top shell. There's a composite hypothesis, and this argues that the shell formed by the acquisition of more and more osteoderms, or ossified scales. And this was supported by limited paleontological data. And this contrasts with the Denovo hypothesis, which argues that the shell forms not from the acquisition of more and more osteoderms, but rather by the broadening of the ribs and vertebrae themselves. And this is supported by a lot of developmental data. And so this was kind of fought out over the past 100 years and was largely the result of the lack of a fossil record. Now this changed in 2008 when this thing was found, Odonachilles, from the late Triassic of China. Now this thing has a fully developed belly shell, or plastron, and it only has a partial top shell, or carapace, but it lacks osteoderms and has distinctively broadened ribs and vertebrae, and thus falsifying the composite hypothesis and corroborating the Denovo hypothesis. So we can kind of add this to the evolutionary lead up to modern day turtles. We can still see that there's anywhere between a 30 and 50 million year gap between Odonachilles and the rest of the turtle stem, or from when turtles diverged from other reptiles. So what I was interested in were these early fossil taxa. What did they look like, and what do they tell us about the origin of the turtle shell? So I went down to South Africa to look at this particular animal, Unitosaurus africanus. When this thing was first described in the late 1800s, it was described as a putative turtle. And then this idea largely fell out of favor in the mid-1900s and was largely forgotten about. So I went down and collected the specimens, and then I performed the first detailed anatomical study of this animal. And I'm not going to go through all the characters, but it does share many features with turtles, including having 9 broadened ribs, has very elongate vertebrae. And then I looked at the development of the Unitosaurus ribs. I did some histology studies to get at how these ribs developed. And I found that the broadened part, or the horizontal part of the rib, is the result of an outgrowth of bone from the rib. And this is a feature that's uniquely shared, at least among living animals, with turtles. So only turtles have this extreme outgrowth of bone, dermal or subdermal bone, from the rib. Now, that's a feature shared between turtles and Unitosaurus. And so there are a number of shared derived features ranging from the skeleton, the development, as well as the inferred soft tissue musculature features that Unitosaurus shares with Odonachilles and other turtles. And now if we incorporate these data with developmental data, you can kind of see an interesting pattern. So those features that are important in building the shell are mirrored phylogenetically and throughout development. What do I mean by that? Well, the first thing to appear in a developing turtle are broad ribs. That's what we see phylogenetically with Milleretta and Unitosaurus. The next thing, we have broadened vertebrae. That's what we see with Odonachilles. And finally, in late stage embryos, we have the full acquisition of the shell. And that's what we see with Proganachilles at around 210 million years old. And so now if we animate these data, we can kind of get an idea of what these transformations may have looked like. First, we have the broadening of the ribs, and we get an animal like Milleretta, that's from South Africa. And then we have an exact halving of the vertebrae in ribs, going from 18 down to 9. That's a unique feature shared only between Unitosaurus and turtles. And then we lose some of the soft tissue parts of the ribs, the cartilage part, and then we broaden the belly ribs, or gastralia, to form the plastron, and then we have Odontocheles from the late Triassic of China. And then at 210 million years, we have Perganocheles. We get the acquisition of the primitor bones, or the peripheral bones, and we basically have a fully developed turtle at 210 million years ago. And then between it and a modern-day snapping turtle, we don't have too many changes. We lose a couple bones in the belly, we have some shape changes, and that's about it. So with that, I'd just like to say thank you for listening and leave you with this image of a modern-day South African turtle with the earliest known basal turtle, Unitosaurus africanus. Thanks. Questions?
What problem are turtles trying to solve?
With the broadening of the ribs? Or the acquisition of the shell, or what do you mean by that?
That which is turtles. What are they trying to
They're aliens now. I mean, I think with the acquisition of the shell, one of the first, why the ribs start to broaden to begin with is because they're fossorial animals. They're burrowing, and that's one of the adaptations for burrowing. It's not for protection. It's kind of like, why did the feather evolve? It wasn't for flight. It was for a different reason initially. Thanks.